What is up, Foco Esports? Coach Graff here. Got a fun one here for you. I am going to play PC Building Simulator with you guys. And this game, maybe it's better to say this program, it's a video game, right? This game allows you to actually build PCs. And so I'm just gonna go and do the how to build a PC with you. This lesson, this unit, this module, whatever you want to call it, being centered around the hardware of gaming. We're talking about designing and building a PC, and then we're going to talk about LAN centers, and we're going to talk about cloud gaming and all that kind of cool stuff. So here it is telling us in this tutorial, we'll learn about the main components of a PC. The first thing we need to do is we need to take the side panels off. So we've got our case here. I'm going to remove the side panels, and so you can see there it pops all the side panels off, and it tells us that the first thing we're going to install is the PSU, or the power supply unit. Now these PSUs can be anything from 100 watts up to, I think they may even make some gaming PSUs that are like 2,000 watts. Normally they're in like the 600, 700, 800 watt range. So I can actually pivot around here. You see the back side of the case here, which is a solid piece, and then the front side here is actually a piece of glass. You can see the trays for hard drives there. You can see the positions for fans on the front and the back there. But right now I need to unscrew these unscrew this mounting hardware that will hold the PSU in place. Go to the parts box. Here it is, highlighted in green. There's my PSU. It has a main power input, which is basically the main power for the computer. And then we have the modular ports. Okay, so this is what the modular ports look like. And they are where you plug in things like your GPU, your motherboard, sometimes there are even fan expansions and all kinds of other power pieces. So let's go to install, click and hold. There's my PSU, and actually I think I can zoom in and then hold like that. Boom, so there's that PSU in there, and then I need to screw these, put the plate on, screw all of these screws in. There's actually 8 screws. There's the 4 for the bracket, and then there's 4 screws that actually hold the PSU. All right, so next step is at the heart of a PC, we need to put the motherboard. Okay, so the motherboard here is being referred to the heart. The motherboard is the piece of equipment that everything mounts to. Not everything, most things in the PC will mount to. So here it is, highlighted in green. Woo boy, on the motherboard. We're not going to go over all of this in this video, but there are tons and tons of parts. First thing I want to point out is the I/O. The I/O ports are the input outputs. So this is where you're going to be able to plug in USB, whether it's USB 3.0, 2.0, whatever, Ethernet, audio hookups, all that kind of good stuff is all going to be here on the I/O part of the motherboard. Tons of other stuff. The other thing I want to point out is the CPU socket. This is where your central processing unit will live, and I believe we actually install that next. So let's click install. Let me move up a little bit and we'll swivel. Okay, so this is where the motherboard is going to live. You can see here, right here, this is where the I/O will be. So let me install it. All right, got to put some risers in. These are riser screws, aka standoffs. These standoffs or risers are what will keep the motherboard from mounting directly to the metal. Now there's like a little gap there. I don't know if you can see it. Yeah, you can kind of see it right there. A little bit of a gap. And now let's screw or bolt it into place. I've got to push and hold, takes a second. 6 screws. Now there are different configurations for motherboards. Again, depending on the PC you build. You guys have experience now with PC part picker. Part picker will help you make sure your motherboard matches with your case, matches with your CPU, matches with your GPU, all the components. Make sure that your PSU has enough power. But that is important to know that this configuration is specific. Okay, so I am going to do the motherboard power supply first. Click and click. Now you can see that motherboard power supply cabling going in there. And then this is the 8-pin ATX CPU power. So this powers the CPU specifically. Okay, so this powers pretty much the rest of the board, but this is for CPU power directly. So it has its own power supply link. There you go. You can kind of see it coming out the top here, going around and down. And then this is the front panel power and control. And I haven't shown you the front panel yet, but I will here in a second, because the front panel is up here. All right, so click continue. That front panel now has wiring. You can see it right here. That wiring goes out and goes all the way up to the top here, right there, goes kind of through the front, and then connects these USBs, connects the power button, connects the auxiliary for the mic and headphone, and then it looks like there might be some other buttons there, but all that will be connected to down here. So now we got to get the CPU, this little guy, okay, pins, processor, heat plate. There we go. You can kind of see the CPU pins there. All right, so let's go ahead and install this. Zoom in. Oh, go like this. Like that. Okay, you have to open the lever and open the mounting plate, and then you put the CPU in place very carefully. There is an emblem on the CPU and there's an emblem on the motherboard, and you line those up and you plug it in very carefully. The CPU has pins on it that can be easily messed up. You gotta be very careful. Puts it in really quick there. Then you close the top plate or the shield, and now the CPU is installed. So the CPU gets very hot and needs to be cooled by a cooler. This is where water coolers versus passive air coolers make for higher or better performance. We need to apply thermal paste first. The thermal paste is what allows there to be optimal heat transfer between the heat plate of the CPU and your CPU cooler. If it's just metal on metal, there's actually going to be gaps, and those gaps will not transfer energy as well. But the CPU paste will fill in all the gaps and actually improve the transfer of heat from your CPU to your CPU cooler. So let's go get that CPU cooler. Over here in our parts bin. Right here we have a we have a CPU cooler with fins. You can see the CPU cooler plate, and then the heat sinks surrounding the CPU cooler. When you go to install the CPU cooler, you actually need to make sure that the wiring is aligned properly. So the wiring will actually come, I think it's supposed to come out of the top, and because the plug for the CPU cooler is above it. So let me go ahead and install this, and then CPU fan, and so this one actually installed the wires down here on the bottom right, and then it goes up on the top, which that illustration does not show that very well. So I don't know if you can see this. The CPU wires come out here and then plug in right here. So it wasn't illustrated perfectly in the game, but what I was saying is those wires have a straight shot. That is a fan, spins at very high RPMs. The wires can get caught in the fan, or your finger. Don't recommend your finger touching the CPU fan if you've got a cooler like this, because it will cut you. I know first-hand experience there. First-hand experience. Pun intended. Let's grab the GPU. GPU being similar to the CPU, but it has its own motherboard. It has its own board. The graphics processor or graphics processors have a board that they exist on. They have their own heat sink. They usually have their own cooling systems. This one has a single fan. Sometimes there's double or even triple fan configurations. But this is the GPU. And so let's go ahead and install. This is going to install back here on one of the PCIe slots. So I need to remove this little back hatch, which will allow the input-output for the GPU to be accessible. And so you'll see, let me screw it in. All right, let me click continue. So here is an HDMI port, a VGA, and then, or maybe that's a display port. Actually, that's a display port and a VGA, and then a DPI, which are all display inputs, display outputs, so that you can plug your monitors in. The next part we need is the RAM, random access memory. This is the operating memory, memory chips. I'm actually going to read this one because it's really important. RAM forms a very important role. This is a stick of RAM. They're very fast types of memory designed to hold programs so the computer can access them as quickly as possible. So it's holding the program's video game memory that's needed to run the game actively, things that are not stored, but instead of it's made to hold what is being run instead of what's being stored. So your computer's using all of its memory, but the RAM is really important because that's what allows you to run these very large programs, also known as video games. Locks here on the end, we are going to lock into the motherboard. So let's shift over here. Looks like we're going to install 2 sticks of RAM, which is fairly common. There is a proper way to install RAM. Some RAM needs to be installed on a motherboard in succession. We have 4 slots here. These 4, it's telling me to install these in succession. Some of you might be cringing to see that. Some RAM, some motherboards need you to install them in a 1-3. Some people in some configurations say it needs to be a 2-4. Just find out what's best for your motherboard, what's best for your RAM. You might get judged any way you do it, but just pay attention to that. It's really important. And so that is the RAM. The next thing we need to do is the hard drive. Now the hard drive is where you are going to store your information. You can have SATA drives, which are basically like disks that store memory. You can have solid state hard drives. You can have, and then you can have like the NVMe style drives, which don't look like this. Instead, they look more like a stick of RAM that plug into a different specific slot. This is going to be a spinning disk drive, SATA drive, that has very fast RPMs and can have very fast read and write speeds. So it can read memory and it can write new memory really fast. Some other types of memory are faster, or maybe faster. So let's pull the tray out here. Let's install the hard drive, push the tray back in. What do we need to do now? We need to connect the hard drive. Well, where do we connect the hard drive? We connect the hard drive to power supply. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 4 places I can plug the hard drive in for power. Let's just plug it into the first slot there. And then now we need to plug in the hard drive for data. And data is going to come from where? It's going to come from the motherboard. And the motherboard is going to feed that data. I don't think there's any difference between any of these ports, but on your motherboard, these ports may have faster or slower connections, read and write abilities. They may even be specific to types of hard drives, so just pay attention. It's telling me that I have 6 slots that I can plug into, so I'm just going to plug it into this one, and we'll be good to go. There you go. You can see that hard drive cable coming out. So there's the power for the hard drive, and here's the data line for the hard drive. And now we have case cooling. Now, some of y'all found out in your project of how to build a PC or design and building a PC, some of your cases came with fans, some of them didn't. You needed them aftermarket, but this is a simple fan. You can pay higher prices for RGB, you can pay higher prices for quieter fans, all of the above, but that fan is going to go into place. And then there's specific little screws that usually come with them that will thread into the plastic of the fan and through the case that will hold the fan in place. Once the fan is plugged in, what do you need to do? You need to power it. But you need to power it through the motherboard, this fan at least, because the motherboard will help control the fan. If your PC is getting hotter, then it will speed the fan up if it can. If it cannot, you could experience issues, throttling, for example, from overheating. So now we can replace our back panel there, which is actually glass, put our front panel on there, and now we need to plug everything in. So, oops, I forgot, you gotta go away. So, choose that. I've got the USB, this is the HDMI, this is the power, so the power plugs into the back of the PSU like that. And the last thing looks like it's the keyboard. Let's plug the keyboard in, and boom. All right, everything is plugged in. Let's power on our PC. There we go. That is it. That is the quick, you could say speed run, definitely not for a world record or anything, but that is the quick run through of doing the PC builder simulator. Really cool game. A lot of times it's free in Steam or on Epic, so if you want to, go out and grab it, give it a run through. And there's some really cool different features that you can play. There's an esports model, which maybe if Mr. Graff was a cool teacher, he would show you. Let's do this. Let me bring it back up. So I have the esports DLC, and then there's an IT expansion as well. And then there's a free build mode, which basically means any of the parts that this game has, you can build it into a PC and test it, which is really cool. So have fun with it, and if you get a chance to get the game and play it, please share. I'm very interested to hear what you guys think, and maybe learn a little bit about what you guys built and what you learned from doing the game. So this is Coach Graff saying, until the next one, stay positive out there, gamers.